What is up guys, it's Topsy and welcome back to the channel. So, Konami's released quite a few SpeedDuel boxes throughout the years, starting out with the original Battle City box and more recently releasing the Battle City Final set. And a lot of these sets are absolutely amazing and I absolutely love this type of product. However, one of the big issues that I've had with some of these SpeedDuel boxes is that not all the decks kind of feel like on par with each other. As an example, the newest SpeedDuel box, the Battle City Final set, is absolutely insane with some of the craziest strategies we've seen thus far, while comparing that to a set like Midterm Paradox, well, that one's a lot more lackluster. And I thought it would be a really cool idea if I went ahead and tackled these decks and started a whole new series where I go back and upgrade all of these strategies. So, what do I mean by that? Essentially, the premise of the series is that I'm going to be taking a look at each of the individual SpeedDuel boxes, and with each of those boxes, I'm going to be trying to fix each of those character decks in a way that still feels a bit more balanced with everything else in the format. And I'm going to be using the following guidelines in order to fix each of these character decks. First, I still want these decks to feel somewhat coherent to what Konami originally wanted to do. That means that with each of these decks, I'm still going to try and follow the original, plan Konami had with each of the character decks. Secondly, I'm going to be using the skills that each of these character decks came with. Typically, each character comes with 2 separate skills, so I'm going to be trying to work with at least one of those skills and then going from there. And lastly, the changes that I make to each of these character decks, I want to try and make them as few as possible, and at that, trying to keep all the cards that I add into each of the character decks only SpeedDuel legal cards. But nevertheless, this doesn't mean that I won't be going ahead and skirting the line a bit. Some of the characters have some very egregious strategies, and honestly, they just need complete makeovers. So do keep that in mind. But with all that being said, if you guys do end up enjoying today's video, then leaving a like and subscribing to the channel would be very much appreciated. It's super simple, easy, and honestly, it helps a ton. So with that being said, thank you very much, and let's dive right in. Alright then, so starting off the series, we're going to go ahead and begin with the Duel Academy box. I did consider starting out with the original Battle City one, but honestly, so many of those decks need so much help that I kind of wanted to leave that one in the background so I have a little bit more time to cook with it. And the very first character we're going to be tackling here is none other than Jaden himself. Jaden's elemental hero strategy is interesting to say the least. One of the things that we should know about regarding his original elemental hero strategy is that for some reason, Konami didn't really focus on making this a fusion-based strategy. Like, don't get me wrong, he has ways to fuse. Of course, we have the polymerization, fusion stage, and fusion recovery in order to aid with fusion summoning alongside the Goddess of the Third Eye, but realistically, making your fusion monsters is not that easy. And instead, the main focus of this deck seemed to be beating down your opponent with your elemental hero monsters with their main skill, Here Goes Something, which essentially targets one elemental hero monster on the field and makes it gain 800 attack points. And that's neat, but it doesn't really do anything for fusion summoning. And the other skill, the right hero for the job, allows you to swap out a hero monster for another level 4 lower one, which again doesn't really do anything given that a lot of these monsters are either vanillas or do nothing monsters. Honestly, both these skills didn't really make much sense for you, Jaden. So the changes that I went ahead and made for him are the following. First off, I think Elemental Hero Wildheart just does not belong in his deck, so we're going to go ahead and completely cut this card. Secondly, I don't really like Goddess of the Third Eye in this strategy in itself, just because I feel like there's a better card we can give him instead. Next up, we're also going to be cutting out the Fusion Sage. Fusion Sage isn't particularly good, and we can give him way better cards than this. Another card that I want to go ahead and cut in his strategy is Negate Attack. We have better cards that we can give him instead of Negate Attack, so we're going to be getting rid of this. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and cut the Winged Karibo. I like Winged Karibo, but honestly, it's one of the worst Karibo monsters, and honestly, if we would have been realistic about this card could have just gone in the miscellaneous pile instead. So, we've cut quite a few cards from his deck, and in addition, we're going to go ahead and be adding in Captain Gold, Prisma, King of the Swamp, Necrogardener, and finally, Hero Counterattack. I feel like these 5 cards in addition to this deck would make a world of a difference. First off, Captain Gold goes ahead and adds you your Skyscraper, going ahead and feeding into the idea of this being a beatdown strategy. Secondly, Elemental Hero Prisma is one of those cards that's going to be helping you with fusion summoning a lot better, just because he goes ahead and substitutes the name for any of the Elemental Hero monsters you might want to try and summon. After that, we have the King of the Swamp, which is going to be serving the same purpose. This is essentially making its way in place of the Goddess of the Third Eye and Fusion Stage at the same time. So fusion summoning should be a lot easier with these two cards in the deck. Lastly, we're going to be taking a look at Necrogarna. Because we do have somewhat of a beatdown strategy, we still do need some monsters that we can go ahead and use from the graveyard to go ahead and protect our monsters during the battle phase. And lastly, we have Hero Counterattack in place of Negate Attack. This card is significantly better and helps you bring out your big monsters like Blade Edge, and at the same time deal with a problematic monster your opponent has on field. I feel like with these changes alone, the deck becomes significantly better and feels a lot more cohesive as it's what it's trying to do, while not feeling absolutely broken and having cards that don't actually feel out of place in here. But in the comment section below, give me your thoughts. Alright then, so moving down the line, we now have Aster himself. And for Aster, there's honestly a lot we need to do with this deck as well. Just like Jaden, I don't think Konami really knew what exactly they were trying to do with this deck, because a lot of the Destiny Hero monsters we get in this deck are pretty damn bad, and it's very confusing to what it's trying to do. For example, the deck is trying to fusion summon some of its better fusion monsters, but genuinely it doesn't have many good ways of getting to them. And for another win condition the deck seems to be trying to accomplish is trying to bring out the Dogma and the Plasma. And these two cards in particular are pretty difficult to bring out, at least for this deck specifically, because you have no swarming capabilities in this deck besides, I guess, setting up a Malicious to get one on field and then hoping you survive multiple turns to establish more monsters on the field. It genuinely makes almost no sense as to what exactly Konami was trying to accomplish with this strategy. And when we take a look at both the skills, again, it doesn't seem to be doing any more for the strategy as well. We have Looking into the Future, which is the secondary skill for the deck, which is essentially just like a version of Destiny Dude's ability, but way worse. And we have Powerful Group of Guys, which kinda helps you swarm the field, but again, you have to control only one Destiny Hero monster on your field, and at that, the Destiny Hero monster you special summon off this skill has to be of a lower level than the one you have on field already. And yes, you have some diverse levels in this deck, but genuinely, typically you're only going to be summoning like really low level monsters. So again, it's just, it just doesn't seem to compute very well as to the point of this strategy. So what are the changes that I would personally go ahead and make? Well, first off, I'm going to cut Dark Angel completely. This card has no real place in SpeedDuel in my opinion. It feels just so out of place, and there are better Destiny Hero monsters we could have gotten in place of this card. So this card goes bye-bye. After that, we are going to be cutting some of the Destiny Hero spell cards, because for the most part, I don't like any of them. First off, Over Destiny, really bad revival spell card. We then have D-Spirit, which is a pretty bad way of swarming the field, so goodbye. After that, we have Dark City, and I genuinely don't know why we have Dark City in this deck. For one, almost every single one of your Destiny Hero monsters has pitiful stats that not even with the 1,000 attack points are you getting over your opponent's monsters, so we're going to get rid of it as well. Fusion Sword of Musara is not a bad spell card or equip spell, but genuinely, again, it doesn't really do much for the deck either, so it's going to leave the collection as well. And these are the main changes that I'm going to be doing for the deck right now. So how are we going to go and fix it? Well, first off, I was considering giving the deck King of the Swamp, but because we already gave this card to Jaden, I decided that a more fitting card instead would be the Dark Hex Seal. This card does a lot for the deck as well, because for one, it works as a fusion substitute for darker monsters, but for two, on field it contributes itself with another monster to go ahead and fusion summon a monster, meaning that you can make a card like Destiny Hero Dangerous a lot easier. After that, I want to go ahead and tackle the consistency of this deck. The deck has almost no consistency whatsoever, and you're kind of just hoping on like dumb luck to have a playable hand. So we're going to go ahead and try and fix that. The obvious choice would be something like Destiny Draw for the deck. It's a dedicated Destiny Hero spell card, but if not Destiny Draw, then at least give them Allure of Darkness. It's a card that already exists in the game, and it works really well for this strategy just because we're dealing with a lot of dark monsters. And honestly, the chances of banishing one of your dark monsters in hand is almost neglectable just because so many of these cards are horrendous. So parting with one of them is not that big of a deal. But preferably, I will go with Destiny Draw. After that, we need a card to kind of go ahead and fill the void of Dark Angel. That's where Destiny Hero Draw Dark comes into play. I absolutely love this card just because it does so much for the strategy. One, it gives you a strong body on field to do some damage to your opponent. Like the deck is needing that really badly. But for two, it goes ahead and helps you with the pseudo swarming ability of the deck. At least what the deck is trying to do. because the fact that Duel Dark allows you to go ahead and special summon another Destiny Hero monster in addition to its normal summon. So that gives you 2/3 of the way there to summoning a Plasma or a Dogma. Alright then, so moving on now, we have to address the equipment that we ended up removing from the strategy. Initially, I thought of giving the strategy Solitary Sword of Poison. It's a very powerful equipment, but the only issue is that even doubling the attack of some of these Destiny Hero monsters almost does nothing for the deck. So instead, I figured, what if we give the deck something like United We Stand, or better yet, Premature Burial. Premature Burial specifically, in my opinion, does so much more for the strategy just because, again, one of the things we're trying to do is establish either a Dogma or a Plasma on the field, but the better thing about Premature Burial is that this card also helps you recover one of your fusion monsters if it ever gets destroyed by your opponent. So, in my opinion, I feel like Premature Burial will do wonders for this deck. Lastly, since we do have 2 fusion monsters in this strategy, I figured that we need another way of either fusion summoning one of these cards or recovering our polymerization. So one of the cards that I thought about giving him is Fusion Recovery, in order to give you back one of the materials used for the fusion summon, and at that giving you back your poly. But I think the cooler card to give him instead is Defusion. This card essentially works exactly like Polymerization, only that it's slower because it's a trap card, but better yet, it does give your monster protection for one whole turn. So I can only imagine you doing this on your opponent's turn, fusion summoning a card like Destiny Hero Dangerous and then giving that card protection for the entire turn, or summoning it on your turn to go ahead and then prevent yourself from being destroyed by any pesky back row your opponent may have. So I feel like this card in addition would be really cool and help facilitate what the deck is trying to accomplish. And with that, I feel like we did a pretty damn good job at fixing Aster's deck. While it's still not the best thing we could have seen, for what we had working with, I feel like this work feels a lot better and helps to compete a lot more with some of the decks in this box. But again, give me your thoughts in the comment section below. Alright then, so right after Aster we have Chazz himself, and Chazz's deck, honestly, I don't have that many issues with, but there are still a few things that I would like to change. So essentially what Chazz ended up getting is a hodgepodge of a strategy where it combines a lot of his iconic strategies from the anime, that being his Ojamas, his Union pieces, and of course his level armed dragons. For the most part, the deck kinda works. It has a decent skill in the land of the Ojamas, and given just how many Ojama cards there are in this deck, honestly, it's not that bad of a field spell, or I guess of a skill for this strategy. So making changes to this deck was actually a little harder than I originally imagined. So here's the things that I was thinking when fixing up this strategy. Firstly, one of the cards that I actually do not like in this deck at all is Spike Shield with Chain. Don't get me wrong, I actually love this trap card, but not in Ojama specifically. I love this card so much in the Koala / Kangaroo strategy just because of how much offense it gives your deck. But in this strategy in itself, it doesn't do all that much because if you have an established board with an Ojama boss monster, give it your knight or your king, you don't really want to have those cards in defense mode. And that 500 attack boost is nice, but it's not doing much for you. So we're going to go ahead and cut Spike Shield with Chain. Next card that I want to go ahead and remove from this strategy is both Try White and the Grave of Enkindling. Don't get me wrong, these two cards in particular are not bad whatsoever, but I just don't feel like they do all that much for the deck, just because, well, yes, Try White does give you 3 monsters to special summon on the field. It has to be 3 of them, that's the one thing about it, and you only have 3 targets in the deck, those being black, green, and yellow. So I figured that this is a bit more of a win more card, and I don't really like those cards, at least if we're trying to fix a strategy. While Grave of Enkindling, while it's cool, it does give both you and your opponent the special summon, and I don't know how I feel about that. Last card that I would go ahead and change is Chiron the Mage. Now, I actually don't hate Chiron whatsoever in this deck. I think he's actually a really good monster for the deck, but I want to go ahead and kind of hone in on what the strategy is trying to do, so we had to cut Chiron in order to make that happen. But if not Chiron, then I would suggest cutting instead, where is it at? Ojama Delta Hurricane. You know what, actually thinking about it more, Ojama Delta Hurricane was probably the call here instead, just because it's a lot more situational. So we're going to go ahead and cut that. Alright, now that we made our cuts, it's time to add in the cards that I think would help this strategy a lot. First one being Masked Dragon. Masked Dragon is here in order to help out the Armed Dragon strategy and give you another monster to summon on turn 1. Honorable mention before I continue is Armed Dragon level 10 and level up. The only thing about these two cards is that being able to see Armed Dragon immediately is a lot less, guaranteed. So I much rather have something like Mass Dragon instead. And while it would have been cool to try to shoehorn these two cards, it doesn't really fit in this deck specifically. So that's why we're not adding them. But continuing on, another big thing about this strategy is that you need ways of discarding your Ojama monsters in order to go ahead and activate the skill. Because the Land of the Ojama skill card requires you to send an Ojama card, and you have plentiful amount of those. But in order to be able to activate, there already has to be an Ojama in the graveyard, so that's one of the big issues. My initial thought is giving the deck Foolish Burial. This gets the job done immediately, but after thinking about it a little more, I got a little greedy and decided that Drag Down into the Grave does that as well. Typically, a lot of your hands are going to have multiple Ojama monsters, and if not, you can modulate your hand in a way where you force your opponent to send an Ojama to the graveyard. And not only will it set up your graveyard, it also gives you an extra draw, and I feel like that's invaluable in a deck like this. So that's why I'm going to be adding in Drag Down into the Grave into this deck. Continuing on, we need a way to survive multiple turns. While it's very nice to have cards like Wall of Disruption and Super Rush Recklessly in this deck, I feel like one more card could be of great utility. The deck already focuses in a lot on changing battle positions, and your opponent's going to be typically trying to shift into defense mode because of the Land of the Ojamas. So I figure having a card that can change the battle position once again would be very much fitting in a deck like this. The last card that I would add to this strategy is the following: Ojama Simulation. Now, this card is ridiculous, but I think that in a format like this, it actually makes a lot of sense. This card would be here in order to pair up with the Ojama Match. Ojama Match helps you pair up the Ojamas with the Armed Dragons, while Ojama Simulation helps you pair up your Union Light Machine strategy with the Ojamas. And I feel like that would be so fitting, because my original thought was cutting completely V-Tiger Jet and W-Wing Catapult, just because these two cards in particular are horrendous. But if I'm able to go ahead and blend all his strategies together with one card, then I feel like that's a given and we have to do that change. Taking a look again at Chazz's deck, I feel like these changes help so much and just flesh out the decks incredibly well, and makes it feel a lot more imposing and still feeling somewhat balanced in speed duels. But give me your thoughts. Alright then, so next character up we have is Dr. Crowler themselves, and Crowler was interesting, and one thing you'll notice immediately is that there's a lot of new cards in the side, and yeah, to say that I had an issue with the construction of Crowler's deck would be an understatement. So breaking down his strategy, it's Ancient Gears. We have a lot of interesting stuff in here, a lot of questionable Ancient Gear monsters like Ancient Gear Gadget and Ancient Gear. Genuinely, I don't know why Konami gave you Ancient Gear in this deck at all. It's a one-up in the deck that only has an effect if you have multiple copies of him. So I don't know what Konami was thinking. And at that Ancient Gear Gadget, this card in particular makes absolutely no sense given that green, red, and yellow Gadget are not cards that exist in the game. So essentially this card has like no effect. So again, I have no idea why Konami even decided to go ahead and print these cards out. Other cards that were weird for me were cards like the Koichi, Trojan Horse, and Mechanical Chaser. Like, don't get me wrong, I kind of get why they're here as like big bodies and or ways of tribute summoning for your Ancient Gear Golem, but like realistically, if your opponent's any good at the game, they're not gonna let you keep a Trojan Horse on the field for like any amount of time without getting rid of it. So yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings regarding this deck. And as for the skills for the strategy, I actually like both of them. One of them is just the effect of their continuous spell, Ancient Gear Castle, and the other one being Ancient Fusion. Actually, it's really cool because it gives you access to their Ancient Gear Fusion spell card, and that's pretty neat. I like that a lot. But what are the changes that I would make to Crowler? Well, first off, I'm cutting a lot of cards here. First things first, I'm cutting Mechanical Chaser just because it's such a bland card in the strategy and I can do without it. So we're getting rid of that. We're getting rid of Trojan Horse. I already mentioned how this is one of those cards that if your opponent's any good at the game, they're not going to get you keep it. Another card that I would cut is the Koichi. I love the Koichi. It's one of my personal favorite GOAT cards, but in this deck, it doesn't really do all that much. Digging a little more into your deck doesn't really accomplish anything, and it's just, I don't know, it's just not a card that fits the strategy very well in my opinion. Next up, we are getting rid of Ancient Gear. This card has no room in this deck, so goodbye it goes. After that, card advance. I do not like this card at all. It feels like a win more card, and it doesn't advance your game state whatsoever. And being able to stack the deck and get an extra normal summon is cute, but it's just not for me. After that, we're cutting damage condenser. There's not that many targets that you would want to summon off the effect of condenser, so we're not going to even entertain it. And finally, while I think this card's pretty cool, especially when paired up with double cyclone, I just don't think it does enough for me. Alright, with all those changes being made, what am I adding into the deck? Well, first things first, I think one of the cards that Konami failed on adding into the game is Planet Pathfinder. I think this card's incredible and especially kind of balanced in my opinion, just given the fact that it takes up your normal summon in order to add a field spell from your deck to your hand. While I do acknowledge the fact that this card would be great in a deck like the Kaiba Union deck, in order to search out Union Hanger, I don't really think this card would break anything else in my opinion, but give me your thoughts in the comment section. Next up, I wanted to go ahead and get some use out of that Ancient Yugioh gadget because honestly, this card does absolutely nothing in this deck, but there was one card in particular that actually goes ahead and makes good use of this card right here. That of course being Ancient Yugioh Hydra, which gets additional effects based on whether or not you tribute summon it using an Ancient Yugioh monster and or a gadget card. And wouldn't you know it, this card goes ahead and follows both of those criterias. So Ancient Yugioh Hydra is another boss monster for the deck, and that feels like really cool and makes the utility of Ancient Yugioh gadget. After that, we have some more power cards for the deck, that being Ancient Yugioh Frame and Ancient Wyvern. In my opinion, I think these two cards in particular are okay, just because Ancient Yugioh Frame adds you a copy of Ancient Yugioh Golem and or the card we're adding into the strategy, Cross-Dimensional Duel, but we'll talk about that in a second. While Ancient Yugioh Wyvern adds you any Ancient Yugioh card from your deck to your hand, which is very powerful, but it prevents you from sending any cards to turn its normal summon. So I feel like that's a fair balance in order to go ahead and get such a powerful search. But if you guys think it's too powerful, then we can go ahead and add back like one of the I guess like a decoy chain into the deck or something like that instead. But I feel like Wyvern would be a very much needed card in this strategy. After that, we have a card like Cross-Dimensional Duel. Well, Cross-Dimensional Duel is a really neat trap card that I like quite a bit. For one, it's a way to kind of protect an Ancient Yugioh monster if your opponent tries to out it by going ahead and banishing it for an entire turn. But at that, it does give you a benefit by summoning it back to the field with double its original attack. Now, this does vary on how powerful the effect can feel like, depending on what you banish, but I feel like if you banish like a high level Ancient Yugioh monster, you should reap the benefits of getting a double as powerful monster, but that's just my opinion. And it also has a really cool effect where it does protect an Ancient Yugioh Golem or Ancient Yugioh Pound, but we don't have to worry about that at all if it would be destroyed by battle or card effect. And I feel like revolving cards in order to protect and or enable Ancient Yugioh Golem is very much needed in a deck like this. Continuing on, we have two more Ancient Yugioh cards, those being Ancient Yugioh Reborn and Ancient Yugioh Workshop, and I think these two cards in particular work so well in this deck. For first, Ancient Yugioh Reborn is such a balanced version of a revival card for the strategy, just because it only revives Ancient Yugioh monsters. And one of the important things we should note is that Ancient Yugioh Golem cannot be special summoned by any means unless it's being ignored, and Ancient Yugioh Reborn doesn't do that, so it won't make a card like a skill like Ancient Fusion broken whatsoever. While Ancient Yugioh Workshop allows you to recycle some of the cards in your graveyard that you want to use once again, and I absolutely love the utility of this card. Taking a look at the deck once again, I feel like this version of the strategy would have been so much more fun to have been able to play in speed duels, but that's just my opinion. Alright, then next up we have Alexis, and genuinely we need to make just a few changes to this deck, if not any. Alexis' deck is one of the best decks to come out of this original box, and yeah, it's like if you take a look, you can see so many of the cards that got hit in her deck, and that kind of just goes to show just the quality of cards she had already available to her. So we don't have to make that many changes. Alright then, so the first change I would make for this deck is getting rid of Ritual Weapon. I don't want the main focus of the strategy being summoning out your original monsters, so getting rid of this card seems kind of necessary. Also because it only equips onto Ben 10 or Ida 10, so typically you don't even want to keep these cards on field. They're usually being used as ritual fodder for the summon of Izana, so this kind of feels weird in this deck, and we're going to go ahead and get rid of it. And in place, we're going to be adding in Rhoda. Rhoda is here in particular just so we can go ahead and Search out cards like Warrior Lady of the Wasteland, or Etile Cyber, and or where's it at? Blade Skater. And it's very important to be able to get access to these cards just because of our fusion monster, Cyber Blader. Our skill allows us to fusion summon this card as long as we have one of the named materials on our field. And if we're able to search it out, then that makes it so much easier to get access to our fusion monster. So I feel like that's a really good way of doing so. Next thing that I would change is go ahead and get rid of Cosmic Cyclone, only because I already have this card in another character deck. So for the sake of like having as few cards repeating in each character deck, we're going to go ahead and give her instead MST. It kind of just makes more sense in her deck in my opinion, just because, spoiler alert, I ended up giving Cosmic Cyclone to Zane, which is a card that I associated with him so much because of Duel Links. But honestly, that's the only changes that I would make to her deck. These two changes alone make a world of difference just because the deck is elevated so much by the quality of cards that strategy already has. So with that being said, Alexis is done. Alright then, so we already mentioned him, but next up we have Zane, and Zane's strategy is pretty good. It's actually grown on me the more that I've tried out and played this deck. So honestly with Zane, again, I don't think we need to make all that many changes to it, but there are a few things that I would want to go ahead and make different from it. The composition of the deck is pretty damn solid in my opinion. There are some questionable choices in the deck. Cards like Straight Flush, Cyber Shadow Garna are cards that I don't particularly love here, but honestly they're not even that bad. And as for Zane's skills, honestly they're both okay. They're not particularly bad compared to like a skill like Jaden or Aster, but they could be better. Now then, what are the changes that I would personally make to Zane's deck? Well, first things first, I would go ahead and add Cyber Twin Dragon as an additional option for fusion summoning on your turn. We already have the Chimera Overtech Dragon and Cyberdark Dragon, so adding in Cyber Twin Dragon would be kind of a cool addition to the deck, so we're gonna go ahead and add it in. Next up, I feel like we should add the Cyberdark Cannon that he ended up getting in, like Midterm Destruction. And instead, we're going to go and replace the Hunter Dragon. Hunter Dragon is not a bad card, it's just a vanilla, but we have a better monster in place here with Cyberdark Cannon that does a lot more than just give attack points. So in it goes, and you leave the deck. Next up, I've already mentioned how I don't particularly love Cyber Shadow Garna and or Straight Flush, so we're going to be getting rid of both of these cards. And in place, we're going to be adding Rare Metamorph and Cosmic Cyclone. I feel like this is a much better form of back removal, and again, it's one of those cards that I just associate so much with Zane because of Duel Links. Not only that, but giving the deck access to Rare Metamorph is really big just because it gives your fusion monsters some much needed protection and or any of your machine monsters in the deck. So this card's just a phenomenal card to add into the strategy. The last change that I would make is more of a nitpick on my side, but it would be replacing Proto Cyber Dragon with another copy of Cyber Dragon. And the main reason I say this is that we already know Zane is one of the few characters in the series that has multiple copies of a card in their deck, and that of course being his ever iconic Cyber Dragon. He has a playset of these cards canonically in the anime, so giving the deck one more copy of this card feels so much better just because it makes cards like Overload Fusion live more often than not. Not only that, but Cyber Dragon alone is just such a great card. It's one of the best special summons in the game, so giving access to two of them to Zane makes the deck feel so much better. And with that, we've gone ahead and fixed Zane's deck. We didn't even have to add in all that much, but it makes a world of a difference. Alright then, we're on to our last two characters for this video, and up next we have Jesse himself. So Jesse's deck is neat. It's a Crystal Beast. It's actually pretty fun to pilot. I played it quite a few times when doing my little sealed format with my friends, and it's one of the decks that I've enjoyed playing more out of everything else in here. But nevertheless, there are a few things that I would like to change regarding his deck. For the most part, a lot of the cards in the strategy make a lot of sense and feel fine when playing the deck. We have, of course, all the Crystal Beast monsters. Everything there feels fine, and the Crystal Seer is a nice little addition that kind of fits the deck. Besides that, a lot of the spell cards are okay to like mediocre, but there are a few that I just do not like. Some of them being cards like Gravelstorm. While Gravelstorm is very neat, just because it's a niche way of removing back row, and at that, it kind of actually works really well with the deck because you can bounce back one of your Crystal Beast monsters in the grave, in the spell trap zone. There's a better card that can do that already and gets rid of back row a lot more permanently. That being Double Cyclone. This actually gets rid of both cards in the field and graveyard, and at that, you don't really care about getting your Crystal Beast monsters in the graveyard because Rainbow Dragon is able to use them from either field or graveyard. Next up, I just do not like the addition of Crystal Blessing in the deck, just because you don't want to clog up your back row with more Crystal Beast monsters, and at that, not cards from your graveyard because they're already live there for the summon of Rainbow Dragon. So we're going to be getting rid of Crystal Blessing. In addition, we're going to be replacing it with Crystal Beacon, which was one of the cards in the miscellaneous pile for the SpeedDuel set. Crystal Beacon does a better job of what the original card was trying to do by giving you access to Crystal Beast monsters from your deck instead, so that's a lot more useful. Last card that I would change is Crystal Tree. Again, Crystal Tree is one of those cards that's clogging up your back row, and it just doesn't really help you whatsoever, mainly because of the nature of SpeedDuels. So instead of that, we're going to give the deck some form of protection during the battle phase, with the addition of Crystal Pair. Crystal Pair is actually a pretty neat trap card that is more than balanced for SpeedDuels, and at that, it protects you for an entire turn from battle. That's similar to Waboku, but at that, it places a Crystal Beast monster from your deck in your spell and trap card zone, helping you facilitate a much easier time getting access to your Rainbow Dragon. So I feel like with these changes, the deck feels so much better. It still keeps its original identity, and it still fits in with both the skills the deck has access to. So give me your thoughts in the comment section. Alright then, so we're now on to our last character, that of course being none other than Axel Brody himself, and his Volcanic strategy. And I'll just say this, Volcanics was my favorite deck to come out of the Duel Academy box. I love the deck a lot, I think it's really fun, but it's incredibly flawed and there's a lot of things that I need to change regarding this strategy. For the most part, we're going to be kind of like steering clear out of a lot of the non-SpeedDuel cards for this deck. Because the thing is, there's a pretty good deck we can make out of this pile that doesn't include adding in any Volcanic cards. So first things first, let's address what exactly the strategy is trying to do. Essentially, Volcanics is a control deck that tries to use its Blaze Accelerator cards in order to get rid of problematic monsters your opponent may have. And in addition, it's also trying to establish a boss monster in Volcanic Doomfire, which is only able to be special summoned off tributing a Tri-Blaze Accelerator on field, which is easier said than done. So it's an interesting strategy. One of my big issues with this deck in particular is that you bleed through life points. That being said, there's a few cards that I want to get rid of in this strategy in particular. First one that comes to mind is get rid of Twister. This card in this deck just should not be a thing. It's a particularly bad form of back row removal just because it has to destroy a face-up card on the field. Well, face-up spell or trap card on the field. But the worst thing about this card is that you have to pay 500 life points in order to do that. And again, we're already bleeding through life points in this strategy, so we're going to go ahead and get rid of this card. In its place, there's two cards in particular that fit the bill. One that already exists currently in SpeedDuels, that being Double Cyclone, but this card's already made like an appearance in two separate decks, so we'll go ahead and steer clear of it. Instead, I thought Parallel Side Twister is another cool card. It's still Twister, but a better version of it, because you can send one of your spell and trap cards on the field, that being a card like Blaze Accelerator or your Tri-Blaze Accelerator, in order to get rid of a card on the field, which is a lot more powerful. So I feel like this card could be perfect in this strategy. Next up, we need to get rid of some of the cards that I don't like in this deck. One in particular being Raging Flame Spirit. I absolutely hate this card in this strategy. Not because it's a card that I dislike in particular, but it just goes ahead and just doesn't fit the theming of the deck at all. In its place, instead, we're going to be adding in Draining Shield. I feel like Draining Shield does wonders for this strategy because, again, we're already paying a lot of life points off the effects of cards like Firewall and or Volcanic Shell. So having a way to both protect a monster on the field and at that recover a few life points is invaluable for this strategy. Next up, I want to get rid of Covering Fire. Now, I don't particularly hate this card, but I feel like there's a part of the card we can be using instead. Just because Covering Fire kind of works on a deck where you're able to have multiple targets on the field for your opponent to have to attack instead. And this deck doesn't really do that. So instead of Covering Fire, we're going to give the deck Widespread Ruin, a card that actually fits the strategy really well and punishes your opponent for trying to attack some of your Volcanic monsters on your field. Last thing I want to go ahead and change in this strategy is get rid of Salamandra. Again, we're dealing into this whole issue that the deck isn't really trying to beat down on your opponent, so instead of that, we're going to give the deck Creature Swap. Feature swap is surprisingly really fun in this strategy, just because you can give your opponent a plethora of different cards for them to go ahead and swap you out for. Some of the cards that you can give your opponent are cards like Volcanic Shell, which benefits you in the graveyard, Volcanic Blaster, or Volcanic or UFO Turtle, two cards that are fairly weak and that if you attack over using your opponent's monster, benefits you only. If you destroy UFO Turtle, you get to special summon another monster from your deck to your field, and if you go ahead and destroy Volcanic Blaster, you get to go ahead and top deck a card for your next draw phase. And I feel like that's such a niche and such a cool and interesting interaction that you can have with this deck specifically. I feel like with these very few changes, the deck becomes significantly better and actually feels a lot more fun to play with. And realistically, this deck doesn't need that many more changes in order to make it significantly better. Alright guys, and with that, this pretty much concludes today's video. In the comment section below, share all your thoughts with me. What are your thoughts regarding the decks that I ended up making? Did you like the changes that I ended up doing? Are you interested in trying out the decks that I've made in your own personal play? For the most part, I think I did a pretty decent job of fixing each of these character decks in a way where they all feel somewhat in an equal playing field if you were to duel using a little tournament with these characters. If you do end up trying out the changes that I ended up making, then share your experience with me in the comment section below. Also, I think that the next set that I'm going to be fixing up is Midterm Paradox, just to continue the line. I'll eventually get to the original Battle City box, but for now, I think that I'm going to stick around the GX era for now, just because a lot of these decks are actually kind of fairly simple to change. But with that guys, I've been Topsy. If you did end up enjoying today's video, then leave me a like and subscribe to the channel. It's a great way to help me out. And guys, as usual, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.